Stuck trying to figure out what to make for New Year's and you're not quite sure if you have enough time to do it yet? Well, I've got a solution for you. I know there's not a lot of time till New Year's, but this project is so easy. You can stitch it up in a day. So if you're short on time, it's absolutely perfect to make. That being said, it doesn't have to be a New Year's dress. It could be any really fancy dress. Now, no, it is not this dress that I am wearing. This dress also only takes less than a day to make. This one is the Esther tunic top by Liberty Fabrics. I will have a sew along as well as a pattern review coming a little later on that. You might be wondering why I am not actually wearing the dress that I am talking about. Very unlike me. Well, it is because I had made this dress back in 2019, well, 2018 for New Year's of 2019. So it has been a couple of years and I have either misplaced it, it is sitting somewhere in my fabric hoarded mess of projects to be completed, even though it is completed, or which I think is more probable, I lent it out to someone and never actually got it back quite yet. That being said, it is out there somewhere and I will find it, but I do have all of the footage I recorded and it will be a little bit nostalgic because I actually recorded all of this footage before I started YouTube. I know. It's been a while, so it's going to be a little bit of a different format. But this video was actually requested by my daughter because it was one of the dresses that she really loved and thought it would make a good video. And I thought you guys might enjoy this along the holiday season because I decided to whip this up for New Year's. So let's get into it. Now, I don't actually have any video footage of me wearing the dress, just some photos that we had taken. It was my husband's birthday, New Year's Eve. So we completely forgot to take the video footage, but we did manage to get a few pictures that the kids snapped of us during our festivities. So you can still see what the finished dress looks like. The draping and pattern drafting. So this dress is super simple. So right here, all I have done is pinned up a rectangle of fabric on the bias. Now I did the bias because I wanted to have a nice draping neckline. Now, unfortunately, you can't see it on camera here, but all I am doing is just pinning the shoulders in place and just kind of gathering it up how I want that bodice to be. And then I am going to go in and pin down along the side seam on my dress form, right exactly along that side seam, and I'm just placing the pins directly into my dress form. And if you want to know how I made this dress form, just let me know in the comments down below. I am happy to do a video on how to make one of these dress forms in the exact size that you are. And then I am going to repeat this on the other side. And you can see that on the back, I also have a rectangle of fabric. This one is not on the bias, that one's on the straight grain, and I just pinned it on either side. So there's nothing fancy going on the back. Now, this is one of the easiest ways to drape your dress just because it is draped nicely and you can add in a little bit of ruching and puckers in here and it looks really nice and it's super easy and very forgiving. Now, the fabric that I chose for this happened to be in my stash for a very long time. I think it was left over from a Halloween costume that I had made back when I was a teenager. And it is a liquid metal and it is a knit fabric. Side note, it is also an incredible pain to sew with. Do ensure that you have a ballpoint needle on hand because you are going to have skip stitches if you don't. I also changed my serger needles on this to ballpoint needles in order to get a nice stitch. So just showing you around here just how I am going in and pinning this. I'm just fixing the bottom layer here along the back. And I am going in and I am pinning, going all the way down, joining those two pieces along the skirt sides. So you can see it is pinned just like so. We have some extra fabric going on along the sides and I'm just adjusting the neckline to where I like that. So this is what it looks like, very glamorous indeed. And I am just going in and I am cutting off the extra fabric here. Now I'm doing a rough cut at first, but then what I go in and do is I actually go in and cut down those seam allowances. Now you can use a water-soluble marker to trace it, but this fabric does not like water-soluble markers. So I actually went in after I had done this and set up those seam allowances a little bit more precise. Now, originally I was thinking of doing a floor length version of this dress, which is why it is much longer on the dress form here. So I just wanted to show you another close-up of me cutting this, super rough cut at first, and then I go in and refine it. Now, what I ended up doing was shortening the length of this like you had saw in the photos before, because of course my husband's birthday is New Year's Eve and he had requested that I shorten the length just a little bit more, get a little bit more of a saucy feel to it. And so this is what it looks like on my dress form. So I didn't actually do any pattern drafting. This is where I refined the pieces and I went in and folded it in half to make sure that it was exactly the same on both sides. And then I cut out a second layer because we want to cut out 2 front pieces and 2 back pieces of the fabric here, being sure that that front piece is cut on the bias for both sides. And then I'm just taking out those pins that I have placed in here. Pinning it together really helps if you're using shears. You can see the bottom of my dress is cut very jaggedy, which is where I had cut it off when I had asked my husband to select a length for the dress. And then I am just trimming that up so it is quite nice. And I did the exact same thing with the skirt back pieces. Now this is very similar to a small circle skirt in the back. So it does kind of hang down and the hem goes a little bit along the bias because it does have that curve to it. So the next thing that I am going to do here is I am just going to pin this on my dress form. So you can see that I'm folding under the fabric along the top right along that waist seam. That's to incorporate that seam allowance. Next, I am taking the front piece here and I am just pinning where I would like my straps to begin. So I am making my straps not out of self fabric, but out of something else, which we will see a little later. And now I am going in here and I am going to be pinning not to the dress form, but to each side of the pieces of fabric. Now, the reason I'm doing this is I didn't do up a muslin for this. I am working straight with the fabric. This is because it is super quick. You want to get this done in less than a day because New Year's is right around the corner. And after checking that fit, it looks good. So let's sew the front neckline and the back waistline. So with this, I am pinning with both right sides facing up. So I've got a right side facing a wrong side of my fabric, if that makes any sense. Because when I flip it over again, I want to have still the inside of the fabric be the wrong side, because with this liquid metal, it can be a little almost sticky with it. It is silky, but it is much more soft on the inside of that lining side. So I want to make sure that the inside of that fabric is that. Now, the reason I chose self fabric to line it with is because this is such a slinky fabric and it has a bit of stretch to it. And I was stash busting. I was just using what I had in my fabric stash. So I am just going in here and I am doing the skirt back now. And it'll look just like this. If you don't have a serger, use a zigzag. Now here I am under stitching. So I have pressed with my hand, because you can't press this fabric with an iron, the seam allowances going towards the lining side, and I am stitching that down. That way, when I turn it right side out, I'm not going to have any of that lining showing. Now, sew the dress front side seams, the upper bodice only. So only this top portion of the bodice is what we are going to stitch, nothing below that waistline seam. So this is my dress and I have got it turned out so that my right sides are facing outside. And then I'm going to place the right sides together of that bodice. So the right and the wrong sides are facing, and then I am going to pin up until that waist point. And I just noticed where the waist started to really cinch in the most. So at that smallest point is where I'm going to stop my stitching, which is also where my last pin is. It's pretty easy to tell on this style of dress where that point is. And then I am just going to stitch this. So we've understitched that one side, so you just want to make sure that everything is folded quite nicely. And then we are going to go in here. So for that corner, I did the one end and then I started off going along the other side because you want it to kind of come up to a bit of a point up at the shoulder strap. And then once we get to the end here, you can see that I am just going to go along where the pins are, and then I'm going to slide off the edge and continue along the other side here. Now for the front straps. So for the front straps, you can see that it looks just like this, where we've got that bodice point kind of done and it's open along the bottom. We've kind of created this little point at the top. Now I really want to get some nice ruching in here to really accentuate that swag going in the front. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my hand needle, and I did not use a ballpoint needle, which was a huge mistake. It was such a bother to get this needle through. I'm basically just accordion folding this strap together and then just using my hand sewing needle to sew a bunch of back stitches through this to really secure that in place and create a nice tight point where my straps are going to come out of. Then I'm just going to knot off that end and clip it off. Next thing I'm going to do is the other side here. So I wanted to show you that accordion fold. So I've done one accordion fold and then the other one, and going through and doing this second one, it was a lot easier to get the needle through when I did those individual accordion folds as opposed to pre-folding it and trying to get my needle through all those layers of fabric. That being said, if you are using a thimble and a ballpoint needle, it might be just a little bit easier for you. So next up, I wanted to test it one more time on my dress form. I always get a little paranoid when I haven't sewn something up and I'm just basically creating it out of thin air. And I just want to make sure that all the pieces are still fitting nicely, even with those seam allowances. So I am just placing it on my dress form, just pinning right on it and then stitching up where the skirt comes to attach to that bodice piece. So you can see that I have stitched that side of the bodice, but the sides going down the skirt are open. And then I am just pinning the sides of the bodice because that is where I'm going to have some straps. I'm going to have a nice strappy back going along the back straps here. And I really want it to pull in those sides. Now to sew the dress together at the side seams. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to work with the two layers. So you have an inside layer and a lining layer. So the lining and the outside layers, you're going to place them right sides together for matching up the front and the sides on the lining. And you're going to do the same thing for the exterior. And so just be careful that you're not getting any puckers or anything, and just match up that back of the skirt to where it starts to open up. And I am just pinning that nicely in place. And sorry about the camera angles. As I had mentioned, this is a video from many years ago, and it was actually before I started YouTube, so some of the camera angles are a little different, but it is really nostalgic because this brought me to when I was actually sewing at the kitchen table. Now in this, we are going to switch the sewing machine to a zigzag stitch. This is because this is a stretch fabric, and I am just stitching going down following my seam allowance. Now I gave a large seam allowance when I was cutting this out because it would provide me with a bit of leeway if I needed to change things up. Not to mention, it is a very slippery fabric. So I am just stitching going all the way down on the one side and ending at the top. This is where that waistline is. And so you can see that that is done on the one side, and then I am going to go and repeat that process on the other side here. And so I thought I'd show you just a little bit of a different angle here. And as I had mentioned with the nostalgia, our house, the walls aren't even the same color, and that serger in the background, I don't even have that machine anymore. So this is really nostalgic, kind of going back and watching some of these old videos, and I'm glad that I was able to share this with you. So I have that all stitched together, and then I am just coming in with those lining pieces here, and I am just pinning that together. So now we have those lining pieces that we're going to stitch together. So I had just stitched the exterior, now I'm stitching the lining side of it. And I am just coming in, making sure everything is nice and smooth because this is incredibly slippery fabric. Now, what I'll do is I'll link a video down below that talks about working with very slinky and slippery fabrics like silks and chiffons. And even though that this is a knit, it is incredibly stretchy and slippery. So those tips might help you out. What I did to finish that up was I decided to serge those raw edges. Now, the reason I didn't just go ahead and serge it and I used the sewing machine was because it is so slippery and it is a bit of a bother. And now I have the skirt sides put together and I'm just placing it back on that dress form and just pinning it up once more. Yes, I'm probably coming back to this dress form more than I needed to, and it will save you a ton of time if you don't do this. That being said, I always like to double check and make sure everything fits just as I like it on that dress form before continuing, so that I don't continue to make something that doesn't actually fit. And I'm just pinning in place once more. And the dress is really starting to come together. And you'll also notice that I did serge the bottom of the hemline just in preparation for some steps that are to come. And I found a little extra thread that I'm just going to clip off here. There you go. We have our dress. And next up, we are going to be creating the beaded straps. So with this, I am just using some beads that I had in my crafting stash. And these are those like tiny little beads that you find in those jars, and you get like 1,000 or 2,000 of them in a jar for like $3. This thread here is actually a stretchy thread that is used to make bracelets. Also, something I had in my stash. This is 100% stash busting. Now, you don't need a needle for this because the elastic, clear elastic, acts like that needle. You can just kind of pop it into the bowl. You don't even have to be precise, just like dip it in and they will catch. Now for a cautionary tale. Originally, I used this chain, this silver chain that I had in my stash to create the straps. I tried it on, and because it didn't stretch, it just snapped when I like moved my arms. So even though the dress is stretchy, it didn't work. Now we're going to attach those beaded straps that we created. So first I am just measuring out how long I need. So I went in with my tape measure and created those beaded straps in the lengths that I needed based on what I was seeing on my dress form. I made them slightly smaller because the straps do stretch, and I wanted to make sure that it did hold up the dress adequately. So first I am actually just draping it from the top just around the arm here. And you can't have this type of strap by itself. You do have to have some crisscross on it, otherwise they will fall off. But this was the design detail that I wanted so that I could get some nice lines going across the back with these beautiful beaded lines here. Now I'm actually really glad that my original design ended up breaking that with the chain, because I really like these beads a lot more, and because this is a rose gold fabric, these blush pink beads fit perfectly compared to that silver chain that I originally used. So right here I am just pinning in the beads where I need them to be, and I'm just going through. So I'm not actually cutting any of this off. So you can see that I've got going down around the two armhole straps and then once across the back. And then I am going to go in with my hand needle, and I am going to attach these by hand. So first I am just knotting a double length of thread. Do be sure to use beeswax on your thread just to strengthen it, because this is a point of tension. So I am just going in also along the sides, and I thought I would show you a little bit close-up view of how I go through that. So I am just threading it through, and then I actually bring it through the bead and continue to knot it as I am bringing it through the bead. And I do this quite a few times because, of course, I do not want these straps to come off, because, well, if they do, your whole dress is going to fall right down. So once I have it secured, I go in and do a couple more knots through the fabric, and then I trim off those threads. Now in this instance, I did clip off the end of that beading because I have the other end that is going to go across the back, and I'm going to reuse that beading for some of these horizontal lines that are going across the back here. And it really just depends on your style-wise on what you are doing. So this is the original chains, and here I'm just showing you the beads that I'm going to be using, as well as that stretchy elastic thread. So back to attaching the side pieces. So going in and attaching them can be a little bit tricky. So I just wanted to show you one more time how to do that. So we have an open end with no knot at the top. I'm just taking a regular polyester thread and a needle. I do wax the thread that I have used and use an iron to really set that in. And then I am just going in with a knot at the end of my needle. And here I am taking a couple of back stitches as well as knotting it in just to secure that initial base of the thread to the fabric. The next step that I do, I actually cannot get my needle through the bead because this is a thicker needle. So what I'm actually going to be doing is I'm going to be looping the last bead through the loop in the thread. So you can see I'm just holding it with my finger. I'm going to pull that last bead right along here. It just slipped out for just a moment, but if you hold it there with enough patience, it will go in there, and you want to really tighten that up right along between that very last bead. And then what you go and do is you take the elastic thread on the other end and your double knotted thread, and you will tie it. Now before I do that, I like to bury that thread, so I create a loop and then I tie that off with the thread. So I've got a couple of loops right along where that bead is, and then the way that you finish it is by tying it off along that tail. So you are going to be attaching that tail with it. And I'm just showing you one more time how to do this. I know this is a little bit repetitive, but this was probably the trickiest part of making the dress, was actually attaching these straps and ensuring that they stay in place and do not break on you. Now, the great thing about using this stretchy thread is it's not going to break on you, and it is going to hold nice and firm and be so comfortable it feels like you're not even wearing anything at all. So when I was doing those vertical straps going along the back, I attach the one end, and then I just continue to put the beads on as I am going. So I didn't create one giant length because that can be really difficult to work with. I just made the lengths as I went, and I was sure when it was on the dress form to double check those measurements of how long it needs to be so that you have the right length when you are beading this up. So I just do a triple knot. I find that that tends to be the perfect amount to kind of keep those beads in place. And then I am just matching up the two tops of the bodice and then finding the point on the beads where that next line needs to go. And I continue doing this on each of the horizontal lines going across the back. That being said, I do have one that goes across the back that drapes a little bit more and is a bit more decorative than the others. And so I am just showing you here just how I'm adding a bit more to each of the lengths of the cording and how I started off, where I just basically knot the end and attach it, and then go in here gathering up more beads just to take it across and finish these beautiful details. And this is what it will look like right now. I'm just adjusting it a little bit on the dress form, and I am really pleased with how it looks. And you can see that one decorative one just hanging nicely there. And now for the hemline. Now I have already serged the edge, and I'm just folding it over the exact amount that the serged edge is. And I'm just using a straight stitch. Because we aren't going to be stretching this fabric at all, we don't need to use a zigzag stitch unless that is something that you want to do. And then I am just stitching this all up to finish up the hem. And now for the reveal.
What's the use in holding on? Can we find a way?
This project is a fantastic stash buster and is really quick to whip up and has a really nice wow factor. Really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, do give it a big thumbs up and consider subscribing. It really does help me out. Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.